Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Wow, terrific. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And let me just say a few thank yous and then we'll get to the panel. First of all, thank you to our dean, our fearless leader, Skip Rutherford, for his leadership of this incredible school and for his warm welcome here. And of course, his entire staff, Nikolai's backstage, but they've just been incredible to work with. So can we just give a big round of applause to the Clinton School? Excellent. So as Skip mentioned, I'm here with the Millennial Action Project. We are a national organization working with young lawmakers across party lines, and we are thrilled to be here in Arkansas because just before we gathered here, we announced the 20th state chapter of our organization here in Arkansas, which we're calling the Arkansas Future Caucus. It is a bipartisan legislative caucus of members roughly under the age of 45 here in the Arkansas State Legislature. We have a few of them joining us right here, and they become part of this national network of young lawmakers, which really has become a movement. And so we're just thrilled to be here, and we thought it would be appropriate to have a conversation here with the community and with the Clinton School to talk about what the next generation of leadership can look like here in Arkansas and how we can govern in a way that represents our best ideals and aspirations here in the state. So I want to just briefly introduce the panel, and then we'll get into the conversation, and we'll hopefully open it up to any questions that you have as part of the conversation as well. So first of all, we have Representative Eddie Armstrong, who is a Democrat from the Fighting 37th District, representing North Little Rock, and as many of you probably know, he was the House Minority Leader in the last session. Is that correct? Excellent. And to his left, we have Representative Sarah Capp. She's a Republican from the 82nd District, representing the western part of the state, and she's currently in her first term and is also a public defender. To her left, we have Representative James Sturch, who is the co-chair of our effort here, co-chair of the Arkansas Future Caucus. We're very grateful for your leadership, James. And he's currently in his second term. When he was elected, he was the youngest member of the state legislature. And he's actually already had the chance to attend some of our national Millennial Action Project gatherings, so it's great to be back with him here. And finally, we have Representative Clarke Tucker, who is a Democrat representing the 35th District, which is mostly here in Little Rock, and I think just outside of Little Rock as well. He's currently in his second term and is professionally a private practice litigator. So please give a round of applause to our panel here. So the theme of today is building a bridge to the future. And it was, when we first had the idea of doing this event, I had our staff look up, famous President Clinton quotes, and then we tried to find a way to mold it for our benefit here. So the reference is quite obvious. This is all about building a bridge to the future, and I believe the representatives we have here really do represent the future of the state here, and I think the best ideals of the millennial generation that's coming up right now. And so I thought it'd be helpful just to start with a bit of their background so we get a sense of where they're coming from, their pathway into public service. And the reason I want to start with this is because today, because of a lot of the political dysfunction we're seeing, I would say mostly around the country, I think Arkansas is doing a little bit better. There's been the disengagement, especially among young people, from getting involved in public service. You have young people who actually have very high levels of service participation, but very low levels of trust and confidence in government. And so I wanted to ask them, maybe we could start with Representative Tucker, a bit more about how you first got involved in politics and specifically when you decided to say, I want to actually run for office and represent my community.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight, and thanks everyone for being here. So I went away to college, and then I came home to law school, and after I graduated from law school, I clerked for a federal judge for 2 years, and during that clerkship, you're actually prohibited from engaging in politics. And to some extent, that was a welcome relief because nobody was asking me for money, or if they asked, I had a good excuse not to give, right? But I missed politics, though, during that 2-year period. And when I got out, I was a young lawyer practicing in a firm, and my law practice took up all my time. And that's fine. That's the way it should have been. But at the same time, I really felt like something was missing from my life, not necessarily politics, but just community involvement. And so over the years, I just became more and more involved in the community in various ways. And, you know, when my predecessor, John Edwards, was term limited in the state legislature, it was something I took a look at and explored. And, you know, people ask me all the time, you know, what's sort of the pathway to politics? And, you know, to me, the answer is it's a little more difficult, because if you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. If you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school. And what's the path to politics? I think a lot of people assume, and I probably did to some extent, that if you want to run for office, you know, you need to be involved in party politics, and that can be helpful. But to me, the path is that you just need to be involved in the community on the projects that you're personally passionate about. Because if you're involved in a project just because you think it may look good, that's going to come through, and you're not going to do as good of a job. But if you are involved in the community on something that you really care about and that's your passion, that's also going to come through. And, you know, how do you spell love, right? It's T-I-M-E. And so every day we all have thousands of choices we can make about how we spend our time. And at the end of the day, if there's a project you're working on and you're doing it because you think it's something that you need to do for some future job you may want, then you're probably not going to choose to spend as much time on it as if it's something that you're truly passionate about. And so my advice to people is be involved in the community. It can be with a nonprofit. It can be with a school. If politics is it and you want to get involved in the party, that's fine also, but that's not the only path. I think it's just to be involved in the community, help people with what you care about, and then do a good job. And if it is what you care about, then you will end up doing a good job. That makes an impression on people. And then if you're well known in the community and you've done some good, I can promise you both parties will welcome you as a candidate. You know, if you've had a good run. It's not like the parties say, you know, you have to have been involved in our partisan meetings before you can become a candidate. If you've done good things in the community and you want to run for office, I think both parties are pretty welcoming in that way.
That's great. Thank you. Representative Sturch.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'll kind of echo what Representative Tucker said. I had a non-traditional route to public service, I guess you would say. I don't come from a political family or even a wealthy family back home in Independence County. My granddad's a Baptist preacher, my dad's a Baptist preacher, my brother's a Baptist preacher, and I went into politics. So I'm kind of the oddball. But I was a senior in high school, and I got to attend the U.S. Senate Youth Program in Washington, D.C., ran by the Hearst Foundation. At that time, there was a man who came to speak to us, a senator from Delaware. His name's Tom Carper. And Tom used to be the governor of Delaware. And he said at one time when he was governor of Delaware, he received this note in the mail. A lady had written all 50 governors across the United States asking one question: what do you think is the secret to happiness? And he said in one of the very few handwritten notes that he ever wrote, he simply took out a piece of paper and said, "Dear Sarah, serve others. Sincerely, Tom Carper." That was his idea to the secret to happiness, and he shared that with us, and it stuck with me. When I went off to college here at Little Rock UALR, I majored in political science and secondary education. I wanted to be a social studies teacher. I loved civics and government in school, and I wanted to try to, I guess, impart that passion to young people that they needed to be involved. The people in Little Rock and the people in Washington, D.C., they're making decisions every day that affect their life, whether it's how much recess time they have or what they're eating in the cafeteria or what they're learning in school. There's people who are affecting their lives, and they needed to be involved and needed to know about it. And so I was always kind of preaching to the choir, you might say. When I went back home to start teaching, doing my internship and finishing up my graduate work, I was teaching 8th grade Arkansas history and 7th grade world history. And let me tell you, beyond any shadow of a doubt, if you can teach 7th and 8th graders, you can do anything in this world. But towards the end of the semester, one student, a young lady, came up to me and she said, "Mr. Sturch, if you're so passionate about it, why don't you run for office?" And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd thought about it, of course, later in life, when I kind of established and, I could afford to do it and so forth and so on. I had all these other goals I wanted to do, but the seat was open and I started to really think about it. And so, I started with my family, because no matter what people say, your family is the ones who take the toll when you run for office. And so I talked to my parents and talked to my grandparents and my friends locally, and then started talking to other people in the community as far as, what do you think about a young person running for office? And they were, of course, all on board. It wasn't a surprise to them that I wanted to do it. So anyway, ended up filing back in 2014 to run for the state representative seat. And surprising me more than anybody, we won 62% of the vote that year. And outspent 2-to-1 in campaigns and everything else, but we went to every chili supper and every pie auction and door to door as much as we could, asking people for their vote. And that's one thing I found out was the most powerful way to campaign. People still appreciate it when you ask them for their vote. And anyway, so we won, and we've been in the House now. I ran for re-election in 2016 again, and I've enjoyed every minute of it because public service is my key to happiness. Because I found, beyond any shadow of a doubt, I cannot give millions of dollars to make a difference. And I don't come from a family who you just hear my name and, oh yeah, that's that Sturch fella, and we'll help him out everywhere we can. But I can give back through public service, and that was my way of making a difference, not only for Independence County, but for Arkansas.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm Sarah Capp. I'm glad to be here tonight. Likewise, I believe that we have an obligation to serve other people. That obligation for me was learned behavior with my family. My father was in a locally elected office. My grandmother was in a locally elected office. My grandfather and my great-grandfather. So I grew up going to different types of political events, and it was just a way of life for us. And then I always wanted to be a lawyer, went to law school, and received a scholarship to attend at UALR. And from there, met my husband, and we had kids, and I always went to different committee meetings and was just involved at a local level. And I thought that my obligation was to cheer on other people and other candidates, and it came to a point to where I was asked to run, and I did, and have loved every minute of it. It's been my first term. I, again, feel like we need to do everything that we can to serve other people, and for me, it has been through public office and helping everyone on a day-to-day basis.
Great.
Good evening. I'm Eddie Armstrong, and I will echo each of them, minus Sarah, and no one in my family has ever been elected to anything until now, but the short and sweet of it, as Clarke said, and as James mentioned, is simply the word service. My road to public office is a little bit different than all of them. I think I've been involved since I was about 14 because I became really fascinated after learning that I could make small changes in my community by picking up trash on the corner or asking my apartment manager at the time if we could remodify our playground because we were sick of playing on a broke-up basketball goal, to my very first internship with my mayor. And I went on to intern for Congressman Vic Snyder, who was a stalwart in Washington, who stepped away, ironically, for his family. He was having children at the time, but then I went on to work for Boys and Girls Clubs of America, and I think that's when the rubber really met the road for me. I had the opportunity to work in their government affairs office in Washington, D.C., and I had the chance to work with then the late Strom Thurmond, who was a bellwether with Orrin Hatch, Patrick Leahy, and Joe Biden on ensuring that Boys and Girls Clubs of America got somewhat, I think about $60 or $80 million in earmarks, which is the last time that amount of money, I think, was going towards a nonprofit. But the light went off in my head that there was an avenue through elected office that really had a greater impact on your communities and especially the greater good of our constituents, regardless of the party. And so with that, I went off to the University of Arkansas and I jumped in feet first in dorm politics and tried to run, and I lost. And then I thought I would run for a treasurer and went on from there to be the student body president at the University of Arkansas, up against all odds. When we were elected, it was history making because we were the second of that person that looked like me, I guess, in the history of the school that ever got to that plateau. But all of the leaders and change agents that I've had the opportunity to sit at the feet at have all said the exact same thing that Clarke and James mentioned. It's really about the passion and desire to serve others. And if you have that in your belly, I suppose that the other proportions for the young people in the room, you will soon, very quickly, once elected to any office, learn exactly what it is to do and how to operate. And I just think that my North Compass or my North Star every day that I wake up, regardless of the policy issue, is to make certain that I am serving those constituents that entrusted their vote to me, because it takes me right back to picking up a piece of paper on the side of the road. If you could get it back down to some of those real pragmatic point of views, I think we'd see a much better America and certainly a much better political system.
That's great. Thank you all. So let me go to Representative Sturch, because you came in as the youngest member at the time, and I think you mentioned now there are 2 members for now younger than you. And I'm curious, just in your time so far in the legislature, what your observations have been of the younger members, your fellow millennials who are in the state legislature. What have you seen so far in terms of differences or similarities in the ways that they govern, the ways that they approach the institution? Our institutions were designed in a different era, and I'm curious how millennials were coming in with a fresh thinking, how they approach the process of governing.
Well, like I said, 2 years ago I was the youngest. Now Representative Pilkington is 12 days younger than me, and Representative McCullum is a month younger than me. But Grant Hodges and I knew each other back in our college days in College Republicans, and Grant Hodges is the representative from Rogers, and he's 6 months older. And so our first term was really spent building relationships. And one thing I found out pretty quickly is the young guy can be the young guy, and sure, he's going to get picked on and called the kid and so forth and so on, but if you can build relationships and you can really learn from the wisdom and knowledge of your colleagues, you will go far. You don't come in there acting like you know it all or that you have the answers for everything, but you come in building relationships and learning from their knowledge, as well as applying things that you've learned along the way as well. So of course, the younger folks that I believe are coming into the legislature are really innovative, and they're really ambitious to try new things. So they do realize that government sometimes will not always work the same way every time. And so in a 21st century, in a changing world, we have to adapt some of our government policies to meet that. So whether it's paying your property taxes online or renewing your car tags online because so many people don't have time or they can't take off work to do some of those things in person, then we can find innovative ways to make government more efficient but more accessible to people. And I think that's kind of really what bridges the gap, is that older colleagues, younger colleagues all want government to work better for people, and they want it to be more accessible for people. And I think we can hash out ideas and we can hash out policies, and at the end of the day we can come together for a common sense solution.
Great, thanks. And let me go to Representative Capp. And as mentioned earlier, you represent the western part of the state, and a bit more rural, I would say. And I was looking at some of the demographics of your district versus, say, Representative Tucker's district, which borders with Little Rock, has higher socioeconomic standing. So I'm curious, when you approach collaborations across the aisle, Representative, how do you go about bridging some of those divides on whether it's economic issues or other issues when you have such different districts in the state? I'm curious where you've been able to find those areas of common ground.
Well, I would say naturally the people that represent districts similar to mine. I mean, you find those people and you connect with them. And the issues in my district that are of concern, before we come into office, we're told we're not going to hold anything against you if you vote your district, regardless of any type of partisan lines. I'm there to represent the constituents in my counties that I represent. And so I think that it's true that we do reach out to those that have similar areas of concern, but it helps, I think, perspective-wise, whether something's going to be a good bill or not, to be able to understand the concerns that Representative Tucker may have in his district and how it may impact those people there, and also Representative Armstrong. So I think being able to look at the different perspectives as a whole just helps you pass a good bill that benefits the entire state.
Yeah, right, that makes sense. So Representative Tucker, I'm curious, as you were coming into office and you were looking to legislate on a range of issues, was your mindset at the beginning one of where can I find common ground across the aisle? Was there anything that surprised you about that process, or was it easier than you expected?
On the day I was elected, the partisan makeup of the House went from 51-49 to 64-36.
Wow.
So it was a huge shift. When I came in, that was really the first time Democrats were truly in the minority in Arkansas, because just before that, the House had basically been roughly equal, and we also had a Democratic governor and a Democratic attorney general. And after I came in, that's when Republicans basically held everything, along with huge majorities in the House and the Senate. And so, that probably affected my mindset to some extent. But when I came into office, I don't really approach legislating in a partisan way, because I view myself as one of 100, not one of 36 at that time or one of 24 now. We've shifted further from 36 down to 24. So, I try to identify ideas that I think, and so, we were talking with the dean before we came out. There are probably 10 or 15 votes, in the session that are really partisan votes, and those always make the news. And then otherwise, we have 1,000 votes that don't make the news, where we're just making a common sense, pragmatic decision.
Right.
And so I think millennials too. I mean, I don't want to say that other folks aren't, but I think that we do a good job of being pragmatic in that way. Mm. And so I have tried to identify issues that are just common sense, essentially, and advocate for those. And it's on a scale, a range of things. Pre-K is something that I campaigned on, that I believe strongly in. That's kind of a bigger issue. That takes millions of dollars to pay for, and I've advocated for that. I don't personally think that's a partisan issue, but sometimes it gets in a partisan way. But, taking that aside, I would say that almost all of the other issues that I personally have tried to focus on are just nonpartisan issues. You get the facts, and I go to my colleagues, and I just present them with the facts as I see them and try to persuade them as to why this is going to be good for the people of their district, which you always want to take into, you want to meet people where they are.
Right.
And you want to consider it from the perspective of their district, and, try to persuade them that way. And people are open-minded, and they're willing to listen to you by and large. And so, it's good. I passed a few bills this session, and a Republican colleague who sits behind me, I came back to my seat, and he said, I just passed one, after I just passed one, and he said, every time you pass a bill down there, we think you're slipping something past us. Huh. But obviously he was just giving me a hard time. But, I think I was able to pass legislation because I identify issues that are pragmatic and nonpartisan, and I try to present them to my colleagues in a nonpartisan way, because I don't have a partisan mindset when I'm down there. And so that's the way I've approached it.
I'm curious, out of those issues that you mentioned were framed as nonpartisan, which one stands out to you as being kind of the most surprising that ended up becoming nonpartisan?
I don't know, because I always wanted to. I probably had a pretty good idea of how they were going to turn out.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example of an interesting story from this past session. I had a bill. It was an ethics bill, and I consider that to be pretty nonpartisan, and that's the way I want it to be. And so I wanted to build a bipartisan list of co-sponsors for the bill. And so I had probably 3 or 4 Democrats, and I was trying to get 3 or 4 Republicans. And the day before I was going to present it in judiciary, the Republicans basically came to me and they said, "I'm sorry, we just can't be on the bill." And so I say, okay. So that I was surprised there for a minute, and I said, that's too bad. But I'm going to go ahead and present the bill. So I ran the bill in committee. It passed out of committee. It was going to be on the House floor in a day or two. And the night before it was going to be on the House floor, the majority leader in the House called me and he said, "I don't know if you want this to be a Democratic bill, but I think some of our members would like to sign on to it." And I said, I will never tell one of my colleagues they cannot be a co-sponsor on one of my. I want this to be a bipartisan bill. And he said, okay, all right. Well, so the Arkansas House convenes at 1:30, and they were having a caucus meeting at lunch. And so he said, "We're having a caucus meeting at lunch. I'll bring the bill up, and we'll see if we get you any co-sponsors. And so now, as I mentioned, there are 76 Republican members in the House. So they have their caucus meeting at lunch. They come to the chamber that day, and I think of the 76 Republicans, like 52 had signed on to co-sponsor the bill.
Wow.
And so that was an issue that I did not expect to be partisan, and then it sort of took a partisan turn, and then it came back in a huge nonpartisan way. Wow. And so when that happened, I basically just sent a message to all 100 members, and I'm like, if you want to be on the bill, please, that's great. So by the time I got down to the floor with that bill, I had like 75 co-sponsors or whatever. But so that's, that was one interesting experience from this session.
And did it ultimately get over the finish line, or still?
It did.
No, okay.
That's the law. That's the law in the state of Arkansas, yeah.
That's a real impact example.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I'm eager to go to Representative Armstrong, because you've been in the leader's office. And when we talk with young members, we hear about all the different pressures and incentives to do different things that might prompt them to be taking a more partisan posture, but you've actually been there. So take us behind the scenes on some of these votes when members are proposing different ideas and they're looking for bipartisan co-sponsors. What are some of those conversations like behind the scenes where you're trying to rally your members for particular bills?
It's interesting you ask. Rewind a little bit in my experience. Before I was ever elected, I served as a lobbyist, and I represented a very well-known little chicken company in Northwest Arkansas that now has all of the meat we consume on their portfolio. And I was very young. I think I was 24, 25 when I started that role, and went to several states, 18 of them. So I got to see the process work over and over and over again on advocating for environmental issues, to ways to better serve the community and feeding America. And some of those experiences really helped me. So when I became minority leader, and we came in with 22 members in my class. I'm a class ahead of my colleagues on the Degas. But if you watch TV, sometimes TV imitates life to a large degree. So movies or shows like The West Wing and House of Cards, and things like that, while a little bit more over the top, there are some real realities to the things that are done behind the scenes. The minority and majority leaders typically are sparring for those votes to tip any one piece of legislation. And one of the largest pieces of legislation that I was most proud of was Arkansas Works now, but the Affordable Care Act, or the private option. And the reason I was most proud of it is because our Senate colleagues, who oftentimes say, oh, your little brother, House members, just stay in your place, let the Senate, we're less of a headache, handle it. But it was very bipartisan in which they approached it, and how they corralled the votes for it on the Senate end, and with then Governor Beebe. And during my second term, we began to really operate a little bit like the Senate behind the scenes on taking a long look at backgrounds of every member in our caucus, where they're from, what their voting record was, what our estimated assumption would be on the bill getting out of committee, what we would need to do in committee, and that's the part that I really get up in the morning for, is the process. Clarke's probably more of the policy wonk. He will spend all of his legal time reading over all the documents and finding where why and shall should be there or not, and I am convinced that we need to get Eric's vote, your vote, and Sarah's vote, and they are all differing votes for differing reasons. So guns have taken on a very unique personality in our legislative body. And a member from the opposite side of the aisle wanted to pass or introduce a bill to make it legal to carry guns in public housing. And in metropolitan urban areas, that's not necessarily probably the best idea, but she came to me as the minority leader and said, what do you think the temperature will be of your members if we introduce this bill? And I said, well, for me first, here's why you should think about it, but it was the respect she had to at least bring it, because she's a rural member and we're not. And in the end, the bill was tapered, was tapered down, but behind the scenes, there is a lot of work and a lot of phone calls made, and a lot of twisting of the arm, because at 10 o'clock, Clarke's vote may be with the team, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, he could have talked to James, and James may have given him a 2+5 answer that was sufficient for him, and he may say, hey, I can't be on that bill. So there's a lot of all the way up until the bill is at the well, the member has spoken for it, and the button is pressed. It's a stress contest, and hats off to my friend and colleague, Representative Michael John Gray, who stepped in when I stepped down because of reasons. I had a child, a 1-year-old little boy that came and just disrupted our life, but I love it, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But a lot of the things behind the scenes you'd be surprised to know are really about counting votes and wagering opportunities to get in front of Sarah and say, well, how can we get you over? Sometimes it's maybe not as easy as it happened for Clarke to get all 75 members like that, but if you're transparent and very clear in what the intent of legislation will do, you oftentimes will find that it's really easy for a member to say, I can be a part of this or I cannot be a part of this. But one of the things I have noticed is that when things did turn over and politics did become a little bit more hypersensitive because of the factions of parties within a party, you started to see members really huddle, and it hurt me once. I think Clarke presented a bill and members voted his bill down, not on the merit of the bill, but just simply because it was a party line thing, and I think they wanted to just show him that we are now in control and you're not, so we're gonna fail your bill. And there's no place in the system, I think, for that attitude, but all too often now, I think in Washington, you're seeing that with our tax bill. Hurry up, we gotta get him elected so that we can get it passed, and then he didn't make it, but they're still gonna pass the bill. So, I mean, you move away from, I think, some of that, we're going to be over here all on one team, and anything that Eddie tries to present, we're not going to vote for it, is just not acceptable and not appropriate, I think, if you're trying to convince young people to become a part of this body.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you mentioned tax reform at the national level. I'm curious, here in Arkansas, is there a cultural expectation that for major legislation you need bipartisan support, at least in recent years, or not so much?
In past years.
Okay.
I think today it's you know, like Clarke said, Democrats were in control for 100 years. I became the minority leader after 100 years, so to think about the position that the nuance of the Republican Party with their factions have to deal with, it's a lot of work. Now, I don't know what you guys talk about in your caucus, but I can only imagine if you've got 3 factions in one party, you know, there are 3 groups there. And ours, it's a little bit different. There's less of the factions and more of the kind of what I've seen happen, especially for millennials or young people, is the old vanguard will soon say, not right now. Right. You know, just, it's not right now. There'd be a better way to dress this up if you just took your time. So there are a lot of things that have taken place that again, I can't speak for them, but for us, it's become a little bit more difficult just to get sensible legislation through the pipeline because of all of the factions. If we remove that and got back to just some of the principles of here's what the bill will do, here are the people it will impact, here are the triggers to it, and here's why we want to promote this legislation. Can you go back to your members and see who will sign on, which I think is how Clarke approaches most of his legislation. If it were done that way, I think you'd see, you'd probably see a little bit more harmony.
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious, do one of our Republican members want to give the perspective from your caucus on that?
Well, we think bipartisanship is great. I mean, in Arkansas, it really surprised me my first term that we only have 90 days for a legislative session every 2 years. 90 days every 2 years in order to get about 1,000 pieces of legislation read, reviewed, and either passed or rejected. And of course, I came in, our party had just, got into majority of the legislature pretty heavily. The governor was in our party, but we still had discussions amongst ourselves. I mean, the Republican caucus, is this the best time to, promote this, to pursue this? Should we wait? Should we change it? I really think that in Arkansas, we're a lot different than what you see in Washington or on the news and some other places, to where we can work together because we're forced to. In 90 days, if you want to get something done, you're going to have to find a way to compromise. For some reason in our dialogue today, nationally and sometimes in the state, compromise is seen as a dirty word or a dirty thing to do, or you're not conservative enough, or you're not liberal enough if you compromise with the other side. And folks, as an old history teacher, to be honest, our entire Constitution is a compromise. If you go back and you read history, you'll see that James Madison and Ben Franklin and George Washington and several did not always agree, and they had some pretty tough fights. But at the end of the day, they compromised on a host of things in order to get something that was better and greater than what themselves thought, something that they thought could last. And I really think that at the end of the day in Arkansas, we can show example after example after example where in the heat of the moment, at the end of a tough day, we can come together and we can reach some common ground to really move things forward.
Yeah, well said, well said. And one thing we talk about with our members a lot across the country is, why would you want only half of the ideas to govern your state or govern the country? I mean, we should, often, I think compromise, to your point, often gets a bad rap because it feels like you're finding the least common denominator. It feels like the mushy middle. That's sometimes the narrative painted about it. But really, I think the way we should look at it is that we're taking the best ideas from all the sides. And as you were mentioning, Representative Tucker, about approaching things in a more pragmatic way. If you can make the argument based on the data, based on the evidence, then neither party has a monopoly on good ideas. So you should take the best ideas and let those rise to the top. And sometimes the type of, I think, destructive politics that you were mentioning, Representative Armstrong, where you want to oppose ideas simply because of the partisan origin of it, that's the infection, I think, in our democracy right now that hopefully our generation can combat as we go ahead.
I think one of the things that it's mandatory if you're young and you're looking to get into this industry. It absolutely does not matter where you come from. And I think for a lot of constituents, you've seen this feeling of being left out, make America great again. For African Americans in the Black Belt of Alabama, regardless of, well, not regardless, there was something he did that was wrong. It was a flawed candidate, and the people spoke for that. We have had bills that have come forward that were bad for the state of Arkansas. HB 1228 was one in particular, and bad in the sense that it could have stifled things up and down the pipeline, from our economic needle to our workforce to driving new industry to the state. Every single person, whether you're a rural person, a coal miner in the hills, the message isn't that you've been left out. I think the message is that no matter where you come from, there's a place for you, right, if you're willing to get to the table and work at it. And we have to, future leaders, I think, have to identify and find ways to go back into their caucuses and say, enough's enough, damn it. I mean, it really gets frustrating to see that it's now, well, we got to do this because this is for us, and we must have this. Well, it's not about me. It's not about her, him, or him. It's really about the 25,000 people we've been elected to represent in each of our districts. And the day that we forget that at the Capitol, I think, is the day that we really, well, we're living in it. Let's just say that. And I think the future's bright, because I have my hands wrapped around some young people that were really upset around the Mike Brown incident when he was killed in St. Louis. And instead of taking up arms and going there and rioting, they got real sophisticated and really focused on ramping up the voter turnout of young people in the state of Arkansas between the ages of 18 and 25. And I think in the last election cycle, it was one of the highest turnouts for young people in the state of Arkansas. So they took that energy that was really steered towards anger and said, our white brothers and sisters, our Republican brothers and sisters, no matter who we are, we have a place in this, and if we don't get to the polls, and I think you saw some of that in Alabama, and hopefully the future will start to glean more of young people getting to the polls and vote for what everybody, I think, needs.
Yeah, well said, well said. Now, speaking of creating a place for young people, I'll just pose this to all four of you, and feel free for one of you to step forward on this one. Is one common challenge that we've seen in many of the states we've been working on is the brain drain and the imperative to retain and attract millennials in a state where maybe millennials are going out to the coasts and seeking out other opportunities. And it's obviously very important to the future of your economy and the future of your workforce to be having talented young people stay here, and perhaps even attracting people from other states. So let me just pose that to the panel. What do you think is the state of play in terms of making sure millennials feel like they have a place here in Arkansas and for Arkansas to be an attractive place for millennials? And what sort of initiatives do you maybe see coming down the pipeline that could be helpful in terms of that?
A friend of all of ours is running for mayor, and one of the things that he was really aggressive on is public-private partnerships.
Right.
And I think legislation coming through both chambers, the House and Senate, that are focused on public-private partnerships in a way that starts to develop an infrastructure for young people that come out of college before they choose to leave Arkansas. We have an open and ready-made infrastructure that says we will employ you. We will get you on a track that your dollar is a sensible dollar and you know what to do with it. I think that that's also the answer for crime in a lot of ways, especially for young people that are committing heinous acts of crime. I grew up in the 90s when Arkansas, or particularly Little Rock, was a part of being one of the top cities in the world for crime. And that was pretty tough, but the answers came to me from things like the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission, things like my Boys and Girls Club saying, hey, there's a place for you. You can serve, you can lead, we will employ you during the summer. It may not be a $50,000 job, it may be 14 grand, but it was my first dollar. And I was able to look at that as opposed to taking on these opportunities to either sell drugs or commit a crime, or in rural areas, do nothing or play on the PlayStation, or maybe the kids don't want to farm or be the next generation of farming in their family. So I think it's important that we look for opportunities in the legislature to create a state-based infrastructure that says we're open and ready for business, so that you don't get so antsy brain drainers and say, I've lived in Arkansas my whole life, nothing's ever going to change, I'm going to go to St. Louis or Texas or anywhere like that, or one of the regional cities. It's important that we try to not only recruit and retain, but to sustain these young people staying in our state. It's important that our business leaders and our politicians start working together to keep them here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just chime in that I think quality of life is a very important factor. I've heard recently, and I'll probably get the statistic wrong, but something like 80% of venture capital is invested in 3 states, and it's California, New York, and Massachusetts. And so I think it's a real concern, because you sort of turn that corner and then it snowballs from there, because all of the talent from all of the other 47 states goes to those 3 states, and then it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. But one of the good things about the technological world in which we live is that you can work largely from a lot of different places, right, when you used to not be able to do that. And so you can work in a place like Arkansas, even if the venture capital is in those other 3 states. And what makes you want to live in Arkansas, well, we see in a lot of millennials, is quality of life. Mm-hmm. And so, we've seen the Waltons, for example, in Northwest Arkansas, really focus on bike trails. That's just one example. This is the 3rd generation of Waltons. It's Sam Walton's grandchildren. But that's one example. But it actually makes a real difference in economic development, because it attracts the entrepreneurs who want to live there, and then they drive the economic engine for that part of the state. Right. And I was at the annual meeting today for the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce, and one of the things they mentioned was renovating with a War Memorial Stadium. And I think that has some real potential for Little Rock, because that's in the center of the city. It's a huge swath of land, and it could be repurposed and serve a huge portion of the community and really enhance the quality of life for Midtown Little Rock. And that could be, just by enhancing quality of life, it turns out to be a real economic driver, because it draws the millennials perhaps from other places, but at a minimum, hopefully it helps us retain our own talent, and then they can help drive us, forward.
Right, absolutely. Go ahead.
I want to just add a quick note. Education, I think, is also key to some of this. 10 years ago, when I was a senior, I know it surprised me, but 10 years ago, there was a big push to go to college, get a 4-year degree. Go to college, get a 4-year degree. Now, I'm the first one in my family to go to college, and so a lot of that came from my dad. But I think right now, we're sitting at a point to where we have to realize that not every student is going to go get a 4-year degree. But that doesn't mean that they're any less valuable or worthless or anything like that, where they can go get a certificate, or they can go get a technical degree of some kind, or whatever it might be, for a job right there in their community. For example, Back home in Independence County, we have UACCB, a community college there, and several high schools, of course, Line College is there, and a big business community centered around manufacturing. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of Bad Boy Lawnmower Company or Spartan Lawnmower Company or Intimidator, but we have a big business community that really needs welders, technicians, electricians, and so forth, and they're really involved in trying to get high school students interested in entering some of these fields. And I can tell you, an electrician makes more than we do as legislators. A plumber makes more than we do as legislators. And welder makes more, you know, but it's valuable careers that are jobs right there at home. And so the more that we can promote education across the board in workforce development, as well as in our communities where it's actually a partnership between K-12 education, secondary education, and business community, I think you'll really see that, yes, quality of life plays a huge role in what communities, you know, are attracting young people and where they want to go, but those young people can stay right here in Arkansas.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I just want to give one person a quick shout out here because Representative Armstrong was referencing our friend who's running for mayor here, and that's Representative Warwick Sabin, who is the co-chair along with Representative Sturch of the Arkansas Future Caucus. He was with us earlier today. He couldn't be with us on the panel right now, but he was just integral for all of us really coming together here. So I just want to say he's with us in spirit. I know he was really excited for today's announcement. So I have one more question for the panel, and then I just want to open it up to your questions after that. And let me frame it this way. Today, part of the reason why we're here today is because a majority of millennials do not believe that politics will solve the problems that we face, and less than a third of us don't see public service as an appealing career track. And I believe that this is this question of millennial civic engagement and what the future will look like is truly a systemic challenge for our democracy. And so the question I want to pose to the panel is, what do you think would be the most important thing we can do to rebuild faith in our political institutions and to ignite a passion for public service?
I think, you know, millennials have been branded as all throat, no vote, that we take to social media and, you know, different forums and we complain and put forth these ideas that we don't agree with. And if we can be more positive and practice civility with others around us, I think that in itself will help inspire other people to run for office and know that they can, again, compete with the other factors that are out there that may be one way or another affecting them, you know, going ahead and jumping in that race and run. So I think how we act as a whole is very, very important in a political mainstream to make sure that our perceptions are positive with others around us, and that we're doing all that we can to try to make a difference other than just pointing out the wrongs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rebuilding faith and igniting a new era of voters. I was thinking about and I'm not old enough to remember any of this, so the dean, I wish you were in the room so he could say, help me out, but the Kennedy era, I think about, or past eras where you had political giants and young people were really engaged and excited to go to the polls and vote for them because they were bringing about a new era of change that our country truly needed. And I think in this day and age, we're undergoing a brand new era of change as it relates to no longer being only male dominated. No longer in the military is it just men and women. If you're from the LGBTQ community, that's a part of the fabric of our America today. And I think the thing that we did with Rock AR Vote was we created this three-tier system where we recruited, we engaged, and then we challenged. And I think that the challenge for young people today, because they are so much more of regular voters, they vote for, you know, Survey here, or they vote for American Idol, or they vote for The Voice, or, I mean, what's hot on campus, it's all in 60 seconds or less. How can you get there and how can you cast your vote? And what we went out there and did, or what these young people did for themselves really, was they spent a lot of time engaging with their peers, finding out what the differences were, talking about the no matter of the political boundaries, and then challenging them to really get up on election day with the phone call and saying, hey, I'm going, are you going? Like, let's not stop here. And I think that that's what's right now in our city, Clarke, we're seeing, and I think the dean just talked about, is that there is a population of people that are much older, our seniors, our patriarchs and matriarchs, that we know for certain they're gonna get their groceries, they're going to check their mail, and they're darn sure going to go vote. Yeah. And young people, if it's not attracting or appealing, or if it's not something that has woken them up and challenged them to really be inspired, it's tough. But to spend a lot of time in the engagement sector first, really engage them where they are and what they want to see, and then challenge them to go to the polls more regularly, I think you'll see a new day. You know, to some, politics are stale right now, especially for young people. Right. And Lord knows, with all that's coming out now with the sexual allegations and misconduct by our leaders, it's really turning them off. So it's going to be a lot more of an engagement factor before you can challenge people to go to the polls, because I know of a lot of them that will probably want to sit home because of the turn we're taking in America right now. That's right. That's right.
Should we... Do you want to jump in, or should we go to audience? Okay, let's go to audience questions. All right, it's your turn. Any questions that you have for the panel? Go ahead.
Talk about how Arkansas Future Caucus is going to impact our legislative process going forward.
James, do you want to?
Well, we just started today, so I don't have all the details per se, but we have so many different caucuses already within the legislature, and typically what we've seen is they'll meet sometimes, of course, during session, but they'll also meet about once a month outside of session. And so right now we're still coming to Little Rock, 2 or 3 times a week for committee meetings, whatever committee you serve on. So we're hoping that we can at least meet periodically while we're either crafting the budget for next session or we're working on policies for next session, that we can really focus on some of the issues that we think will impact the millennial generation, whether that's student loan debt, whether it's adult literacy rates, whether it's entrepreneurship in our state. I really am hoping that the Arkansas Future Caucus can kind of really be the voice for the millennial generation, that we can actually craft legislation. I mean, within our caucus, we can say this is sponsored, endorsed by, crafted by the Millennial Caucus, or the Arkansas Future Caucus, and we really think that it could have an impact. And so then present it to the larger body, of course, when session convenes.
My name's Connor Phlox. I'm a first-year student here at the Clinton School, and appreciate y'all coming out. You brought several Clinton School students to school during winter break, so that's a feat in itself.
Wow.
But Representative Armstrong, you started to mention this at the very end there, but with the understanding that the millennial, not to generalize, but that generation, just statistically, the voter turnout's decreasing and also very low, especially with the 18 to 24-year-old range. Can any of y'all talk about bipartisan efforts that you feel like have happened in the past or are going on now specifically, or you could see happening in the future, to either remove voting barriers for that block or encourage that generation to get out and do so themselves?
That's a good question.
I'll just kick it off. A couple years ago, one of our colleagues, Representative Charlotte Douglas from Alma, came up with this idea called Take Your Legislator to School Month. And so every legislator in September goes and visits a school in their district, whether that's a K-12 or college or preschool or whatever it might be. Several of us visit all of them. I try to visit every school within my district every September. Of course, I'm going to different events in between there, but as far as giving presentations, meeting with students, talking with students about my job, and really giving them a background of what it's really like to serve. And I really think that goes a long way. Like I said, we just started it a couple years ago, but I've already seen people, young people, get interested in coming to page for us during the session, coming to just kind of shadow me one day, just to kind of see what it's really like to be in politics and being a legislator. And I think for some reason, politics is seen as a different career than anything else. If you're going to go have knee surgery, you want a doctor with the best experience and so many number of years and so many patients and so forth. forth. Or if you need a good lawyer, you want someone who's won 1,000 cases and so forth. But when you go and look at a politician, you want someone who's never been there before or doesn't have any experience. And so I think we need to kind of start, I think, bridging the gap for young people to say public service is a noble career. And public service is something that's valuable, that you can get an experience while you're still in school. Because I can't tell you how many opportunities I had when I was in high school to kind of get involved that really made an impact on me to show that these are real people. And when you can make it real to young people, I think that really brings it home.
And I'm going to expound on that. Representative Tucker mentioned pre-K. And last summer, our caucus, the Democratic caucus, went out on the road and advocated for pre-K. And one of the things I think for millennials, what you're seeing is in addition to party, it's priority. What bill gets passed when and for what reasons to keep one team ahead of the other team to say, we did this. The Affordable Care Act. Regardless of what we call it in Arkansas, Arkansas Works, Obamacare, a lot of people campaigned to do away with it for 250,000 constituents in our great state. Our governor, Asa Hutchinson, realized, I think in very short order, that there was no way that we could just 86 this entire program and take thousands of people off the roll. And what I saw and experienced were both Republicans and Democrats, both in leadership, working with the governor to ensure that we had Arkansas's best version. And we should be proud. I think we are one of the leading states in the country that actually, in some sense, got it right when it relates to providing health care and insurance. And a lot of people don't understand insurance. But to pre-K, I think in the future, we Democrats brought this to the table. We barnstormed on it and went county to county and talked to pre-K educators about the importance of having this in some of our more rural areas. But because the timing was off, and maybe the member that was carrying the bill, it definitely got a back seat. And I think that that's something to springboard off of Representative Sturch's efforts to bringing young people to the Capitol and convincing them that this is a good field for them. There's nothing more important than giving our young people a good starting point, and especially in a state like Arkansas with some of our education disparities. And I know the Clinton School students are working on a lot of that often. But to take the timing of who can spike the ball for which side of the aisle first, if we can move away from there and start looking more at maybe our kids do all need pre-K, and maybe they don't need to pay for it if they can't afford it, just as long as we're giving them the best start. And it's my hope that the Future Caucus can look at that and try and move that in a more bipartisan way for everyone.
How many students do we have here at the Clinton School? A few here. Excellent. Well, thanks for taking time off of your winter break to come out. Other questions? Oh.
Hi, my name is JP Gerhan. I'm from Central Arkansas, but I'm a student up at Fayetteville right now. And so I guess my question is there an avenue at which the Millennial Action Project is aimed towards those in public service, correct?
That's correct.
Sure. So is there an avenue at which someone who wasn't necessarily in public office could become engaged with the Arkansas Future Caucus or the Millennial Action Project in general? Other than just maybe volunteering or coming to events?
Absolutely, and I'd be curious to get your ideas as well. But what we've seen that's really powerful is that the Future Caucus becomes a platform for millennials across the state, for them to be involved in submitting their ideas. And in many of our states, we've actually done statewide conferences where we have students and young professional groups come to the state capitol, and we have basically a millennial town hall, and you can share your ideas and be part of really shaping the agenda. I think one thing we saw when we were founding the Millennial Action Project is too often young people feel like they're on the outside of the process. And the point of future caucuses like this is for you to have a partner on the inside, for you to be in touch with on a more regular basis, and to have a group that maybe has a shared generational experience as what you have and might be able to relate to some of the issues that you'd hope that they take on legislatively. But if you're looking for other ways to get involved with Millennial Action Project more broadly, definitely go to our website, and we have a whole set of ways that you can be involved there. Any additional thoughts here? That's good. Okay, great. Other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Doug McDowell. I'm retired and I live in North Little Rock, but I'm actively interested in politics. One of the biggest problems we have in our state nowadays is youth unemployment. The last statistics I saw was that it was at 37% as a statewide level. And of the thousands of bills that are introduced in the legislature, I got a perception that most of them are written not by our legislators, but by special interest groups looking for something that's going to benefit their trade or industry. And one of those was passed back in 1982 that's contributing to our youth unemployment. Back then, there was a regulation that prohibited the sale of alcoholic beverages wherever motor fuels were sold. And the convenience store industry worked heavily to get that regulation overthrown. So gas stations in the wet counties could begin to serve beer along with everything else they have in their convenience stores. And when this was passed and they started issuing beer permits to gas stations, there was no limit passed on the number of those permits that could be issued into each county, like the liquor store permits, which are one permit for every 5,000 residents in the county. Today, thousands of job opportunities for the youth in our community have been eliminated due to that, because we have beer on just about every corner and in every Dollar General store in a wet county. And once they get that beer permit on the wall, most of those businesses will no longer hire anybody under 21. So we've got kids making their way through high school, many of whom have never had a job in their lives because all those jobs have dried up. It doesn't bother the big box stores like Kroger and Walmart and stuff, because they normally have more than a dozen people working. But in a Dollar General or your neighborhood convenience store gas station operation, there may be just one person on duty at any one time. And those under 21 cannot handle alcoholic beverages. They cannot ring up a sale, they cannot stock a cooler, they cannot build a display or anything else that involves beer. And these jobs have disappeared, which once were usually the entry-level job for any high school student could get one at his neighborhood gas station. And I don't think that when you pass legislation like this at the behest of a special interest group, very little attention is given to what the negative consequences of such legislation might be for your community. And I just hope that in the future you'll look at that.
Right. Anyone want to respond to that? Or
I'll just say briefly, and Representative Sturch referenced this a little bit earlier, but one thing I think we're doing a better job of now, and it's kind of a recent development, not just in Arkansas, but across the country, is there was a lot of emphasis for a long time on going to 4-year higher educational institutions, and there still is emphasis on that, as there should be. But it's not the exclusive path anymore the way that maybe it once was in terms of emphasis from government and other institutional support. And so I think we're doing a better job now of offering other pathways to teenagers. In the Little Rock School District, for example, where I live and represent, the superintendent, Michael Poore, is working explicitly with the business community to provide pathways to jobs. There's career technical education programming in high schools in the Little Rock School District for those teenagers to get jobs where the employers need employees and need workers. And so there's direct employment through that, and there's also through the 2-year institutions, which James was also mentioning earlier, to get a certificate of some kind, like welding, plumbing, electrical, or whatever the case might be. And so I think we're doing a better job of opening up those pathways to youth, in addition to the 4-year higher education institutions, which we need. So, I think and hope we're doing a better job of addressing that now.
Great. I think we have time for one more.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Thurman Green. I'm a recent graduate of the Clinton School. My question is for those millennials of us who we still have faith in the political process. We still have faith in public service and doing what's right on the behalf of future constituents. But we feel like we may have the skill set, but maybe a little nervous about moving from conversations with friends of just talking about being a candidate to actually running and putting ourselves out there. What advice do you have to millennials who are in that thought process?
Run. That's it.
From it or to it?
To it.
Okay.
Run for office. Just run.
I was going to say from it.
Good question. I promise you that you're qualified. And so, you have ideas, they're worth hearing. And, one thing that I've found that's been gratifying is, I'm on the younger side in the legislature. And, my colleagues who have more gray hair and wisdom than me, they treat me with the same respect that they do with other members their own age. And so, I've been totally accepted in the Arkansas legislature regardless of my age and regardless of the fact that I'm in the minority party. And so I would just say, just run. I mean, and it's like James said, it's kind of like getting married or having a baby. It's like, oh yeah, I'll propose when I have everything lined up, or we'll have a baby when I have everything lined up. I got this savings account and whatever the case might be. Well, or I'll run when it fits my career and that sort of thing. I can, when I was younger in high school and college, I would think, oh, I'm going to read that book when everything slows down. Well, they ain't slowed down yet. So I think if you have a passion for something, you just need to do it. And we need more. The more people who run for office, the better off we're all going to be. And Stephen asked a question earlier: how do we inspire millennials? Millennials just need to run it. And to your question, if we meet with millennials in the Arkansas Future Caucus, they see this guy right here. He may no longer be the youngest member of the legislature, but they see this face right here, and they know they can do it. And they may not know that right now, And so I think for us to be involved, to be engaged, as Representative Capp said, to behave in a civil manner, civil discourse, and provide that example. Give people examples of how you can actually make a difference. Try to provide that inspiration. I think that can be the benefit of all this, but that's advice. You just need to run and have conversations with people, about running, because once you have those first few conversations, very seldom, a lot of people say they were approached about running for office, and that is true some of the times, but a lot of times you have a few conversations with people, and that's kind of how the ball gets rolling. That's how the process gets started. And then those people, even if it's 4 people or 5 people, they have conversations with other people, and they say, oh, he would be great or she would be great. And then they reach out to you and say, I heard you were thinking about doing this. I hope you do it. So I would just encourage you to have conversations openly about the prospect of running, and you just start moving. Inertia takes over, and you start moving down a path, and you learn about how the process works through that way. But I would just say, the more people that run, the better off our entire society is. And so I would just encourage you to run.
Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on. And let me just close by saying I'm extremely grateful. I'm grateful to, first of all, our Millennial Action Project team, who's represented by Sharice here, and others I know are tuning in online. And we wouldn't be here without them. So let's just give Sharice and our team a round of applause. I'm very grateful to all of you for not only coming out today, but for still believing that politics and public service can be an honorable thing that we do, who believe that young people should be involved, and who believe that we can overcome the divisions in our country, because it's important for us to be a United States of America. I'm very grateful to our friend Skip and the Clinton School of Public Service for just being so generous and warm and hosting us today. We're very excited to stay in touch and continue the partnership. And finally, I'm extremely grateful to our 4 state representatives here for being on this panel and for being part of the Future Caucus. President Clinton often talks about distinguishing between the headlines and the trend lines. And today, if you read the political headlines, it's easy to be discouraged because you see all of the partisan conflict and all of the ways that government is being dysfunctional. And it's easy to be turned off and to turn away just based on the headlines. But with the Millennial Action Project, we have a different perspective, is the trend lines. We are on the ground, and we get to work with young state representatives like the ones that we have here today. I believe they represent the trend lines of where our country is going. And if that's true, then I think the future of our democracy is extremely bright, because the young leaders here and the young leaders in your community will be taking on these positions of responsibility, and they will represent, I believe, the best of our ideals in public service. So please give a big round of applause to our state representatives. Thank you, and have a good night, too. Sure, yes. Okay, Okay, great. So we're going to now open it up to a reception. We have some food and drinks, so please join us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Hey, let's give Stephen a round of applause here. This guy's doing a lot of work.
Thank you, Skip. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. And again, we have a reception in the reading room. Great job, panel.